When I was in music college, I regularly cycled 20 plus miles a day. And because I grew up in a rural, carless family and then moved to study in central London, I never actually learned to drive until I was in my early 20s. In fact, after graduation, my first 6 months of my first real job, teaching music in rural Lincolnshire in the UK, I found myself cycling upwards of 50 miles a day, towing a bunch of musical instruments from school to school, and then collapsing as soon as I got home in the evening. But even today, there are few things that make me happier than jumping on a bike, be it my stationary not a peloton to ride up a hill climb muttering, I am, I can, I will, I do, or maybe pushing myself hard to some EDM, or even going through to jumping on my old 1970s 10-speed Sears lightweight bicycle for a ride in the real world. Cycling is still an awesome experience for me. So when the channel started to get offers of electric bikes to review, I was pretty darned happy, but it didn't take me very long to realise that not all electric bikes are created the same. And you might have also realised that of late, we've slowed down our e-bike reviews quite considerably. So today I'm going to explain why that is, as well as give you some great tips on how to pick the very best electric bicycle you can for your money. While you've been able to get hold of an e-bike now for decades, it's really only in the last 10 years or so that e-bikes have become enjoyable to ride. Prior to this, most e-bikes were underpowered and heavy thanks to those big old lead-acid battery packs that they needed to use. They also had pretty terrible range, maybe 10 to 15 miles, which is 16 to 25 kilometres. They had slow recharge times, and they were really only good enough for a quick trip to the shops and back. But now, there are electric bikes coming to market with much lower prices, sub-1,000, insert your preferred currency here, super lightweight frames, beefy electric motors, and battery packs that on paper look incredible. And if you take a look at YouTube, you'll see many reviews from influencer types telling you how great the latest and greatest bicycle from a company you've never seen is so great and so fun. But the reality is that many of those reviews are paid for, and the reviewers are on commission. How do I know this? We get a lot of pictures. Usually they're from companies we've never heard of, asking if we'd give a paid review of 5 to 10 minutes in length. They offer us an affiliate sales commission of anywhere up to 10%, and they helpfully provide a list of things that we must mention in our review. And they want to see the review before it goes out. Of course, we always say no to paid reviews because we don't do them. It would affect our journalistic integrity. And when we do get e-bikes to review, we still occasionally do, we only agree to doing a review if we're not paid, if we have complete independence in our review, and the company that sends us the bike agrees that they will see the review the same time you all do, i.e. when we hit publish on YouTube. We stopped accepting the majority of e-bikes for review, not only because they take up a lot of time to review, but for the most part, very few e-bikes we've reviewed on this channel have survived very long. E-bike that we reviewed a year ago, for example, has now gone through a new set of pedals, a new seat, and plenty of other things that have needed replacing. Michael rides it now. And some rides we've been offered and turned down have, according to online customer complaints, been beset with quality control issues and poor customer support. And if we're going to recommend you buy an electric bike, we don't want you to be in that position. So here's our tips on how not to be suckered in by an e-bike that feels too good to be true. First, let's talk about where you buy from and the research you should be doing before you hand over any of your moolah. Sure, they may cost less than a fuel electric car, but e-bikes need to be built with the same kind of attention to detail as any other EV, or in fact any other vehicle you're considering buying. And sadly, while some channels online try and pay attention to the good and the bad, there are way too many channels out there, especially on YouTube, TikTok and similar, that will happily praise an e-bike or some other product for money. In fact, If we did that at this channel, I'd probably be able to pay off my truck, pay off our solar panels, give everyone a raise at the company, and probably more besides. But we value journalistic integrity first, so you know to follow the link below to support us in other ways. You'd be helping us out. While it's possible to buy a new electric bike, sight unseen, using online retailers, it's frankly like pretty much everything else online these days. You're on your own. If you know what you're looking for, you ask the right questions, and you buy from a reputable source. Amazon is not a reputable source. You should be just fine. If you're buying directly from China via AliExpress, something I've actually done for other things before, you also need to be cognizant that aftermarket sales and service is most likely going to be considered optional extras by some companies, most notably the ones that seem to be charging you an astonishingly small amount of money for whatever it is you're buying. Simply put, if you're buying online, read lots of reviews, including on multiple sites. Some of the more unscrupulous e-bike manufacturers actually go out of their way to remove negative reviews. So, if possible, I'm always going to recommend you buy locally from a known vendor of e-bikes. For example, here in Portland, Oregon, there are multiple good bike shops that also have a number of well-known e-bikes in stock. And there are also a number of really good e-bike specialist shops. While buying an e-bike locally requires you to put in some extra work, you'll have to physically visit a shop, you're ultimately going to have a much better chance of finding an e-bike that suits your needs. Book some time to try out different e-bike models within your budget, and then ask lots of questions in the shop. They'll be able to find an e-bike that's appropriately sized for you, as well as one that suits your needs and budget. Frankly, while fat tyre bikes are all the rage right now, you're going to find them not very fun for daily commutes than you might, for example, on a gravel trail at the weekend. The other advantage to buying from a local e-bike shop is that they should advise you on what's legal or not where you live. E-bike regulations are so wide and varied that they can change from city to city, and knowing what's legal and what's not can really help you avoid getting in trouble with authorities. And because there are different types of e-bike accelerator and operation styles, going to a physical store to try them all out can help you figure out which style works for you. Of course, the final benefit to going with the dealer is that when things go wrong, they should also be happy to help you with after-sales service and repair. In my experience, e-bikes purchased from local stores also tend to be better built overall, as the shop selling them wants to make sure it isn't hit with lots of unhappy customers coming back requiring fixes or refunds for their POS e-bikes. They're also more likely to set up your bike properly after purchase, sometimes for free and sometimes for a small fee, so you're less likely to have to deal with manufacturing issues. Regardless of where you get your e-bike from though, you should be asking questions about the bike's battery and general construction before you buy. With e-bikes now becoming more and more affordable, there's a worrying increase in the number of e-bike fires hitting the headlines, and as we explained in this video, link in the description, a lack of appropriate safety regulations for e-bike batteries mean that many e-bikes are being built with no or poor quality battery management. When e-bikes used to use lead-acid batteries, the worst thing you'd usually end up with was the smell of rotten eggs or perhaps a very short battery life. But with the latest lithium-ion cells, cells with much higher energy densities, a poor or missing or malfunctioning battery management system can lead to thermal runaway, which leads to a fire. If a company you're considering buying an e-bike from can't give you battery pack specs and can't tell you who the battery was certified by and provide a verifiable certification to prove that fact, walk away. CE and/or UL certification is an absolute must, although be aware that while these certifications mean the battery pack has passed basic safety tests, it doesn't necessarily mean everything will be trouble-free. I should also throw in here that some municipalities now require CE and/or UL certification for the bike to be sold or used there, so it is well worth that extra paperwork to hunt for a battery pack with a proper certification. Oh, and I should also mention here that some unscrupulous companies conflate battery cell certification to battery pack certification. Just because the battery cells themselves are certified doesn't mean the entire battery pack and battery management system is. Next, let's talk about the frame. It's our experience at this channel, and frankly one of the reasons we've started to say no to unknown e-bike companies, that some of the metal e-bikes are made of is a little naff. In the case of one e-bike we recently looked at, the metal of the frame, which the bike manufacturer had advertised as some sort of fancy alloy material, was so soft that a standard mudguard bolt obliterated the metal it was being tightened into before the bolt had got anywhere near tight. Michael, who used to be a machinist, had words about that, let me tell you. It's an inconvenience to have metal give up when you're installing a mudguard, but it's something completely different to have that same metal give up on screws holding the handlebars to the stem, for example. And it's dangerous when that happens. As I've already alluded to, buying from a local bike store should help eliminate concerns about poor quality metal and components, which I'm going to talk about now. Brand name components such as Shimano, SRAM and Tektro should be a good indication that the e-bike you're buying is going to be a better build quality than ones that use no-name or copy components. Brakes and gear shifters are the two big ones here, and again, buying from a local shop lets you test the bike out before making a purchase decision. Check routing for brake cables, power cables and gear shifting mechanisms. We've had several e-bikes cross our paths at the channel that had terrible cable routing and actually required us to improvise attachments to stop those various cables from fouling on the wheel or other moving parts. And I know that I'm sounding like a broken record, but you can't check these things out using an online store. Finally, you need to pay attention to the construction of the bottom bracket, pedals and crank. Cheaper e-bikes often use push-fit crank arms that over time wear out and just become loose. More importantly, it's often pretty difficult to retrofit new hardware to the bottom bracket of an e-bike because there are often custom torque sensors that you need to accommodate. And it's also usually the case that you can't add more than a single crankset. That said, Michael was able to change the gearing of his e-bike recently with some careful parts shopping, fitting better pedals and crank to give him a more pleasant riding experience when the e-bike wasn't providing assistance. Like all types of bicycles, assisted or not, e-bikes are best purchased when you have time to try them out first, and while you may end up paying more, you're going to end up with a more reliable, usable steed than if you just stick a pin in a Google search. That said, there are some exceptions. Some e-bike companies, while completely online, are known for having great after-sales service and support. And some are hybrid, with online sales support but also physical locations. Rad Power Bikes is one such example. Although they're pulling out of Europe as the time we film this, they will happily help you pick a bike that's right for you, as providing after-sales service as well, regardless of if you go to their headquarters or buy online. Finally, while e-bikes from local shops may be more expensive on account of them usually being built by name brands, I'm going to always advise it's better to buy a high-quality used e-bike that's been well looked after than buying a brand new one writing checks it can't cash. Either way, take your time, try out lots of e-bikes, and let us know what e-bike brands you're in love with and which ones you think people should avoid. Oh, and always wear a helmet. On that note, we are done with today's video. If you have comments, you can drop us a polite note in the Discord chat room. If you're on Mastodon, you can leave us a message there, or if you're a Patreon supporter, you can also message us through Patreon. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links to support us with a YouTube membership or a Patreon subscription. There are also links below to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and Swag store, as well as that aforementioned Mastodon server. Scrolling on my right is a list of amazing charged up supporters, and shout outs go out to our V2G Patreon supporters: Alan Tupper, Andrew Martin, Bennett Elder, Brophy Wolf, Chris Maxwell, Cyprian Laplace, Dan Blair, Gordon C, Hey Esker, John Trammell, Carl Fox, Mark Eggleton, Peter Dillinger, Regine Fellows, Sean Tucker, Stefan Framgen, Stephen Williams, Tesla in the Gong, Paul Bricknell, Tony Moss, Carl Hodgson, Chris Centaur, Denny Hyde, Lance Schall, Linda Irish, Mike Weeder, and Paul Nelson. And finally, big thanks to our off-grid supporters: Paul Conway, Kevin Burrowbridge, Stephen O'Donoghue, Jim Burness, Robert Flannery, Aaron Hahn, Ellery Hensley, Rory Litwin, JP Fagerback, Dave Kitchen, Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, Chris and Michael Johnson, Clay Witt, CPU Freak 101, Eric Knack, Joe Bresney, John Henderson, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobenak, Nigel S., Reggie Watts, Will Graylin, and of course, Ian. And if your name has not been mentioned and you've recently signed up, our sincere apologies. We do very much appreciate your support. Thank you. Don't forget that we make videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday on this channel. Plus, over on a Sunday, you can catch up with our chicken and garden update and our Sunday musing. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you soon. And as always, keep evolving. You might have noticed that my G4 Cube behind me stayed off in the video today. It's now on. The reason is that it's being temperamental. There's something wrong with the hard drive, and it will boot from a CD-ROM, but it won't boot from the hard drive. As I said in a previous video on the channel, one of my things that I need to do is put an SSD in there so it can boot off the SSD, because the spinning iron is getting old, and that's true of all of these old, I guess, vintage retro computers. It's hard to think of a machine that I used at music college as being retro and vintage. But one of the weirdest things is that I remember is that the G4 Cube was considered kind of the best computer that we had in my music college common room area, and I used to try and get to use that one because it was the fastest machine. That was back in 2001, I think. And it's kind of bizarre that I've got one here today. I never dreamed that I'd actually be able to own one of my very own.